Welcome to Rockstar Doctor Life. I'm Melissa Longo. As a chiropractor, I believe we have the profound ability to impact our communities and people's health on a global level, while also enjoying rich and rewarding personal lives and giving attention to the things that matter to us. Each week, you'll hear an inspiring conversation to give you ideas and insights to rock your practice, pursue your passions, find more connection and meaning in your life, and create a life and business that works for you. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Rockstar Doctor Life. Now, usually we do a great chat with a doctor who's actively in practice, and we talk about all things chiropractic lifestyle. Today, though, I think we're going to do something different. We're going to talk about something that is impacting, certainly us chiropractors in Canada right now, and something that I think docs all over the world can relate to. And that's some things that are going on politically that may affect the kind of practice style that we are able to enjoy. So joining me for this discussion is Dr. Craig Hazel and Dr. David Fletcher. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, it's always great to be invited and to share with really wonderful chiropractors.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. It's great to be here.
So for those of you who've listened to the show before, Dr. David has been a previous guest. We had a really great conversation, and I actually think we talked about international trends and what you're observing with your travels. I'll drop a link into that show, listeners, so that you can listen to that great conversation. Dr. Craig, you've never been on the show before, so welcome. I'd love it if you could just give us sort of a little nutshell, what are you doing these days in your practice in Ottawa, and also what got you involved in politically with working with the AFC, which is the Alliance for Chiropractic, which is an Ontario-based organization.
Yeah, so I am a private practice in Canada, Ontario, which I've been there for 14 years. We have a family-based pediatric practice, and we've got myself and 2 staff, and just been rolling for the last 12 years, having a great deal of fun, seeing lots of folks in the community, doing a lot of outreach things that include everything from health expos to just enlightening people on the merits and benefits of chiropractic. I became the chairman of the Alliance for Chiropractic 2 years ago. I had been a director with the organization for 3 years prior to that. As one of the more senior directors, it was voted that I would be moved to the chairman position, and I've held that position now for the last 2 years. The Alliance for Chiropractic was started 20 years ago. It originated as the Chiropractic Awareness Council. And originally, it had intentions for being a public outreach or education entity, and it continued along, but it also continued to act as a bit of a advocate for the College Regulatory Board to make sure that certain matters with regards to some of the political aspects of chiropractic just continued to be maintained and continued to be promoted as far as a subluxation, neurologically focused chiropractic organization. Excuse me. And then about 2 years ago is when I took over the helm of the Alliance for Chiropractic. We decided to do a bit of a rebranding, simply for the purpose of just updating things. We really wanted to update our vision, our mission, our values, some of our purposes and intentions and directives that we wanted to carry forward going into the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so we've just rolled through these first 20 years, and we're looking forward to many more as far as representing chiropractic in its true essence in a neurological model. So.
Yeah, and you're a busy guy. You've got a family practice, you've got children, and now you've taken on this role. So what motivates you to contribute to the profession in this way?
Chiropractic has changed my life in such a dramatic way that I love chiropractic. I love everything about it. I love what it does when you see a patient respond to care. I love just the conversations that the community of chiropractors have. I love the education that we receive and the impact that we can have on humanity. So when it's not Patrick Gentempo once told me, it's not a matter of whether you'll be and get involved in politics at some point. It's just a matter of when. So I believe it was my time to step in and to help out, because I was seeing certain things that were happening and trends within the chiropractic profession that had been coming since since I started in school, to the point where I was starting into private practice, and I was starting to see certain trends that I wasn't happy with. And I knew that there was a lot of us who were head down in practice, who were doing our thing and serving and helping a lot of people, but we were still missing a whole quiet part of the profession politically that was starting to change. And I knew that if I didn't get in, who would? So it was a matter of just stepping in and standing up for what is right. I had the same conversation with my kids the other day, because they've been seeing me on the phone and answering emails and doing a lot of things lately. And I just had the conversation with them. I said, sometimes you've got to stand up for what's right, and you've got to make sure that when certain things are starting to happen in your lives, you've got to make sure that you're standing up for the people that and things that are most important. And we want to make sure that those things are being well represented, that they're being represented with integrity, that they're being represented and being held accountable to. And so really the directive that I have right now is to make sure that that continues to be carried forward, and finding a legion of people to help out and back up and support that whole mission and the vision.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your commitment to the organization. I think that's a really good, gentle reminder to all of us that you do need to step up in small ways. And it might not be being the chair of a board, but it might be showing up in your community a little bit differently. And maybe we'll talk about some of these other initiatives that people can take on individually to just continue to support the vision of chiropractic being an amazing healthcare service for people. Dr. David, you've been in active practice for many, many years, and I know you're not in active practice now. You've been speaking internationally, now as the president and CEO of CLA. What are you observing the most within chiropractic fees? Let's open the conversation with, maybe you can tell us what's going on within Canada and comparatively to some of the things you're seeing internationally with your travels.
Yeah, I'd be thrilled to do so. Craig brought up the CAC, which was, I was thankful enough, I was one of the original framers of the Constitution and the bylaws of the CAC back 20 years ago. And the fact that it has a 20-year history, it really brings to light the fact that the message that we're hearing in the media and in the profession, unfortunately, itself is that this is nothing new. I mean, if we go back in the history of the profession, there was always a schism that was, straights and mixers and things of that nature. I don't think that we're as deeply polarized as it was way back when. I think that there is always a healthy discussion as to what scope represents. I think that for chiropractic to define itself as a distinct profession, we have to, I think that if you take a look at the word profession, it stands for the word profess. We need to speak out. And as a result of that, to remain unique within and to be viable as a profession, we have to have a uniqueness, something that isn't just a corollary to something else, or something that isn't just another derivation of, for instance, physiotherapy or other therapies. There has to be something unique about chiropractic, and that was defined, in its original tenets. But also, as we have found our legislative capacities, we've always had a unique place within the healthcare profession, albeit many people don't understand what our uniqueness is. And I'm good with that, because that challenges us to have a stronger and louder voice. But actually, when we ensconced in Ontario, where we are speaking from, the Chiropractic Act, and if you take a look at many of the legislative bodies, and I'll speak to the Canadian side, I remember sitting in and being a framer with the GCC over in, when UCA was taking on the BCA at that time over in the UK world. There had to be this distinction that chiropractic was really unique. And the easiest way to draw on that distinction was to look at the lexicon that got us to where we are. And so we really reinforced the use of the word subluxation. And I know that really is a torch for many, and it can ignite others and it can embrace others. But if we really look at the original tenets as to what subluxation is and where it is now, we could almost substitute the word subluxation for a state where we're seeing neuroplasticity, using 2018 terms, neuroplasticity as being either engaged or missing. And, I think that people who really detest this sort of stance of the uniqueness of this, we'll call it philosophy of chiropractic, is that they just don't really notice the current nature of what we who are in the subluxation-centered family-based model really are truly embracing. Mm-hmm. And, I'm led back to a dear friend of mine who's, who always said it was Larry Markson. And he always said, chiropractic is the only profession that circles the wagons and then shoots inwards. Mm-hmm. And, instead of protecting ourselves, we shoot ourselves in the foot. And what's emerging in Canada, what you asked me, is something that really has come to a very abrupt and flexible point, is that things are happening in chiropractic, but they're mostly being spawned by other chiropractors taking on other chiropractors. Mm-hmm. And so instead of necessarily standing for something, there's a divisiveness that's being put forward many times at the board level. It's being picked up by the media, and the media, as raw as it can be, is playing on this, and it's bringing the public into an idea And so, Craig, you and I have been, and Melissa, yourself as well, we have the national newspaper in Canada, but our local newspaper, which is the Globe and Mail, locally, really writing hit pieces on chiropractors and using innuendos that this sort of cultish approach, using the subluxation and, a version of what's called vitalism, which they sort of look at as animalism or animism, is what drives us. And it couldn't be anything further from the truth. I think that what we need to take a collective pause, and that's what the latest initiative that Craig and another number of us as guardians, or we'll call them as collaborators, have been, is to sort of say, wait a minute, let's use some of the tools we have, and let's get a more consistently unified voice going on. And I'll sort of leave this sort of monologue that I'm doing here by saying, this is something that is necessary. When you get pushed to one edge of the pendulum, it's bound to swing to the other side. And there's a good middle ground for us all to be very happy to be chiropractors. There's lots of scope and lots of room for us to do it. And right now, the pendulum that is being propagated in many of our legislative bodies in Canada here, and I know around the world, is to be very limiting in our scope of practice, to limit ourselves. Forget about the evidence-based, that's what, that you have to have evidence to search something. They are pushing us away from neurofunctionality and pushing us into a very narrow band of something called manipulative sciences, manual medicine, associated with MSK versus NMSK. And I think what we really have to do is stand up and say, where do we stand as a profession? Why would we limit ourselves? And why in heaven's name would you take away scope that we fought so hard to get?
Mm-hmm. Craig, how does, thank you for sharing all that. I think that gives a lot of context to our conversation here. Craig, how does some of these current trends, or what's happening right now, affect people's direct ability to practice? Or could it, right? Just to give people some context about why you need to be paying attention to this conversation. And like we said earlier, possibly making some changes in how you're behaving locally and globally.
Well, at first I'd say that you look at the state of Texas, just most recently as 2 weeks ago, they actually narrowed their scope of practice strictly to an MSK model. So you got to think for a second that anything that would fall outside of that, let's say a patient has a concussion, let's say that a child comes in with and presents with colic, let's say an asthmatic, according to that scope of practice and the limitations that it has regulated, now those patients would not be able to be seen by the chiropractor. Now, what we have continued to profess is that chiropractic is not a treatment for any of these problems or any of these conditions. But what we do know is that a child with a concussion or a child with colic would benefit from a proper functioning nervous system. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at the context at which these regulations have started to limit, it really narrows the focus into that MSK model. And what we're seeing is that there is a push, not only in Texas, but also across the United States, here in Canada and overseas, to relegate us to just that MSK model. And by doing so, you automatically become exclusive to everything else. Whereas what we're saying is that if you look at a Venn diagram like David was describing, it's like there's a big lot of us in the middle that practice within a widespread context. Some of us may be more MSK minded, but some of us may be more family directed, where we check and adjust as necessary. And then there's the ones on the very far extremes, and those ones we really don't need to spend a whole lot of time just not worrying about, but commenting on, because those are going to be the extreme back pain limitation, 6 visits or less type folks. And then on the other side, those are going to be the ones that subluxation is everything, the pelvis is an extremity, and it's just simply that's the way we adjust. So we can't speak to those, but what we can say is that there's a whole mess of us in the middle that can start to work together to start to understand and define exactly what it is that we do as chiropractors. Now, I say that, but really those definitions were created almost 80, 90, 100 years ago. In the early infancy of chiropractic, we defined what chiropractic was and what it wasn't. And as David talked about, the schism had started to form where some wanted to elaborate and do other things in an adjunct to chiropractic, and some wanted to focus on certain aspects within chiropractic. But the reality is that if we become MSK centered and MSK focused, it becomes automatically exclusive to anybody that practices outside of that. And so that is the biggest thing that we disagree with, is that you cannot redefine a profession. This profession has existed for 123 years, and there's some in the profession that would wish to redefine the entire model of chiropractic.
Mm-hmm. Dr. David, are you seeing the same trends internationally? And do you have anything to share with regards to what you've observed and then the fallout of it, or how it's impacted?
Yeah, I think that we can really follow the trail of this whole discord by really looking at the schools. So, when you take a look at national schools, you take a look at CNCC, which, we're graduates of, and Craig, you're a graduate of Parker, but we can take a look and sort of see the trends internationally. Many of the schools that are ensconced in the UK embrace the MSK model only as its outcome, and so we have a generation of chiropractors, especially in the UK, that have struggled to maintain the original nature of the chiropractic modeling. You take a look at the antithesis of that, and you take a look at a country like New Zealand, and you can compare that to, say, Australia. The NZCC made a decision back when they were formed, and also what they have put forward in the very narrow window of time, that they would be exactly as we described it there, is that they would be heavy on research, but the research would be focused on the outcomes of the subluxation as it relates to human health potential and otherwise. And it's a very, very fine school, and they have some of the most relevant research that's coming out that's, again, focused on that. And the practitioners that come out, students and interns and now practitioners that come out of it, have a very clear understanding of this broad, wide scope that they operate in. And so you can really see that from where they graduate. And, Craig, unfortunately, in the tenure that I've been in chiropractic, we've watched, the essence of your alma mater go through many derivations to where it now is undefined as to what the graduates really are from. So on an international basis, I think that there has been a very strong point of view, most especially who, we take a look at the college presidents of the stakeholders who want to retain this broader perspective, if you would, the subluxation center perspective, and they form a community and gathering that's known as the Rubicon. So, at a sort of an academic level, there's this sense that there has to be a sense of order being brought back into the legislative committees and legislative thrusts, and it needs to begin at the educational side. So this is not, I may have referenced some of this sort of straight mixer stuff. I mean, my goodness, in the earliest of days, the mixers were those who looked below Atlas.
I was thinking a lot of the new docs have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I know. But there was a time in the earliest days of chiropractic where it wasn't so much about an adjustment or not an adjustment. It was about where you adjusted. If you actually went below Atlas, you were a mixer. So, we're talking now about an entire generation. And we have this in Ontario, and you speak to some of the peer assessors who are going around and meeting the spectrum of either new grads, midterm grads, or now established practitioners. And there are significant numbers when they're doing chart reviews and otherwise of patients that go and see a chiropractor and have never once been adjusted. They have never had an adjustment applied to the spine. They have simply done soft tissue work. There has simply been postural re-education as far as verbalization goes, and a lot of physiotherapy equipment. So there is nothing distinctive about attending to a chiropractor. And my brief little one, I live in Toronto, and I'm a member of a quite well-known club here in Toronto, and they have an entire spectrum of health facilities available for all of the members that are there. And they invited the physiotherapists, the massage therapists. We have osteopaths in here. We have acupuncturists, and there was a chiropractor who came in, and they invited openly to have that. And the chiropractor was the one who had to fold up their tent and move away because they weren't offering any other services than what the other people were. Is that there was no distinction as to why anybody in this, rather prestigious health facility, health and fitness facility would even consider going to a chiropractor, because what that chiropractor put forward was nothing that couldn't be replicated by people who were literally skilled. You know, if you wanted to go to a physiotherapist, you chose a physiotherapist. They had no relationship as to why a chiropractor would be in the mix. Not that they were antagonistic to it, they just didn't have any point of view.
Yeah. And I just think, I mean, the adjustment is the most powerful thing that you can do to the human body from my perspective. And not just because it changes neurology, right? And I was taught that at CMCC. It wasn't just like, you know, I learned that when I was, you know, hanging out with chiropractors outside of school, you know. So what I find confusing is that, like you said, you both said, like there's this fringes on both ends, right? There's the docs that want us to just be mechanically based, musculoskeletal specialists. But then again, how does that define us as doing anything unique from a business perspective? And, you know, we go to school for 4 years to learn how to adjust. We understand the neurology. We understand the anatomy, like no way like the physios can possibly understand, right? There's the value in our education. And yet there's value in that middle ground because we understand the impact on the body when you adjust someone. So to limit, you know, to take that part of our scope of practice out, whether you practice in a sports rehab type of environment or a family wellness environment, to me, it doesn't make any sense because that's not even how we were taught.
Just to put some context around what David was talking about, I've talked to several peer assessors, and each of them have to do, I believe it's 10 assessments per year. And some of them have served as long as 8 years. And so you take that, each one of them pulls 10 files when they go to a DC's office. So you think 10 per year, 10 files, that's 100 files a year times 8 years. And the number that I've consistently heard from at least 7 or 8 of the assessors is somewhere between 8 and 12% have received a chiropractic adjustment on each subsequent visit. So you think about the uniqueness, and I put this question to a leader in one of the provincial associations. How do we demonstrate uniqueness in the marketplace? If we just talk about it from a business standpoint, how do we demonstrate uniqueness in the marketplace if we become more the same as everyone else? Because what the reality is that kids are coming out of, graduates are coming out of chiropractic colleges. I refer to them as kids now, with $250,000 in student loans. And they have no market-ready tools that allow them to demonstrate that uniqueness in the marketplace, anything different than what perhaps a physical therapist would. And I'd say that's probably the closest parallel. So you think that a physical therapist can go to school for $24,000 to $40,000 total, and they have tools and the ability to practice very similar adjunctives. And we're not saying that you can't do those in your chiropractic practice, but the uniqueness of what a chiropractor does and the power that lies within a chiropractic adjustment to affect humanity, to affect a person's nervous system is so profound. But somewhere along the way, we have lost the essence of what that is. We've lost the ability to understand exactly what that impact is. I learned it when I was in school. I've seen it firsthand, as well as the both of you have. So to say that chiropractic is limited just to treating back pain and neck pain and musculoskeletal conditions, largely of which they're going to manage without even actually touching the spine. They'll be promoting that you are everything from an ankle specialist to a shoulder specialist. And so by limiting that scope, it really starts to relegate us into a box that affects just how beautiful this profession is and the dynamic ability for us to affect neurofunctional improvements within people.
David, something that comes up a lot when there seems to be discourse between these, different outlooks on how we should practice is evidence-based. And it's a sore spot for me at times because I feel like there's a tremendous amount of evidence to support the way I practice and the way that you practice and Craig practices. Can you touch on that too? Because I know that you've spoken extensively about it. I've done seminars with you, the neurology of a chiropractic adjustment.
Oh, I'd be delighted to. I think that, again, you have to have, if you're going to work with a philosophical, everybody has a philosophy, whether it's medicine's philosophy of care, chiropractic's philosophy of care, you have to have an epistemology that goes along with it. And the relationship of that means that you have to have a corpus or a body of knowledge that supports why you do and how it works and what goes on with it. And so chiropractic has been engaged in research for a tremendous amount of time. And we have a tremendous amount of evidence-informed and evidence-based models. Evidence-based is really focused more on randomized controlled studies, which I think we're all highly aware of, have very limited perspectives in the biological sciences. If you're taking a look at the outcomes that are affiliated with that, we could certainly, dissect much of the value of an RCT, even when it's put in these controlled environments like drug-based, outcomes and things of that nature. There was a sort of tiered down approach, and I don't want to use the word down because it really was, to my mind, a tiered up approach, which was to say, listen, it's evidence informed, which really speaks to the idea that we're watching and observing this very complex system, which is the human biology and the human experience. And we're becoming informed through evidence that is coming out of that experience as to exactly what we can anticipate. And I think that what we're really starting to see now is a third level of discussions that need to be brought into it, which is practice-centered, which is not a single case study, but we're taking evidence-informed approaches and now looking at, when we look at large population studies of people under a certain model of care. So I don't think anybody in any of these relationships disregards the fact that, there's an old saying in Texas that says you can't stick your hand in a pot of glue without something sticking. And the reality is that you can't stick your hand into a spinal function without it involving neurology. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Whether you're looking at their proprioceptive inputs or whether you're looking at the local phenomenon. And I've always said, that the subluxation message is really about looking at neurology and not confining it from the IVF outward. It's really all about looking at the totality of the functionality of the nervous system. And even if we take a look at and gosh, we could talk hours on this, but even if we took a look at the original philosophical constructs, which were wrapped up in the deepest of the quote unquote philosophies of chiropractic, it was based upon what was called the triune of life, where you had matter, you had transmission, and you had intelligence. And intelligence in today's world is about organizing in through complex systems. But what we know is that you have to have force, or that transmission, you have to have a force that allows this intelligence to be distributed through matter. And what I know more than anything is that we who are looking closer into the neurological sciences, as we take a look at this force and intelligent design coming together, recognizes that as you take a look at the impact of chiropractic at brain-based function, if you take a look at the impact of chiropractic on local function, if you take a look at this in an evidence-informed approach as you're going down the way, it isn't about, anybody can kick you in the shin and say, hey, something in the brain lights up. That's not novel. You can do anything and it's going to show up in the brain. It's whether or not a impact of an adjustment creates lasting change within that brain-based functionality. And the answer is a resounding yes. And we see it not only in using, tools like EEG, which Dr. Heidi Harvick has really pioneered as the use of it, but you take a look in my more extensive realm, which is looking at functionality on things like heart rate variability, where vagal tone and looking at autonomic balance and function really set the stage for us to be part of a community, call it healers, call it healthcare providers, call it trusted advisors, where we have such a relevance because a chiropractic adjustment applied to a spinal functional nervous system changes everything within that person. And we know that. Mm-hmm. And we just have to get over ourselves and say, and stop saying, well, limit us because we're not, quote unquote, evidence-based. We are evidence-based. We see evidence of the impact of a chiropractic adjustment every day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think that it's been exciting for me to watch and learn from some of these people because, I've been in practice for 17 years, and even the doctors and mentors that I had before I was in practice, you're seeing neurological change with every adjustment. We didn't always have the science to validate that. And now I think so many cool things are happening, at least what I've watched in the last 17 years. Yeah. So, we've had a great discussion here today. If there was something that you both wanted us to leave listeners with regards to, what can they be doing to advocate if this is wherever they are on this spectrum? We've talked about, docs who are really, musculoskeletal based and docs who are more family wellness, neurologically based. And then there's a lot of docs in the middle. And we're seeing, in Canada here that there's definitely a push to limit our ability to practice in the middle or over here. They want to push us into this far end here. So for docs who are listening today, what are some things that they could be doing if this conversation resonates with them and they want to see some change happen?
Craig?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that you've got to find yourself connected to like-minded people who are thinking the same. This isn't going to be accomplished on a couple of people. This has got to be a concerted effort by a large group of us that agree that the freedom to be able to practice chiropractic as you wish in a spectrum of chiropractic must be upheld. We need to make sure that all of us are continually working together to lead the tribe collectively, because in numbers we become stronger and we can represent quite significantly. We had started a group of like-minded chiropractors, and you can, I guess, you can reach out to Melissa if you like to be included into that. But the other thing too is that we didn't touch base on this, but you've got to make sure that you're connecting yourself with organizations that support that vision. So everything from looking at your malpractice insurer to make sure that you're going to be properly represented as long as you stay within the scope of practice as you see fit. If you're going to be relegated to a certain, some of these organizations would wish to relegate chiropractic to a certain restrictive type of care, as we've mentioned. But what you want to do is make sure that you're being supported by a malpractice insurer that's going to protect you in the event that you are practicing outside of what the organizations or larger organizations would like you to be relegated to. So really take a look at what your malpractice needs are. Make sure that you are governed and protected to practice in that spectrum of chiropractic. Also too, is, on that note, is if you are a member of certain associations that do not advocate for a spectrum or a inclusive widespread type of chiropractic and neurofunctional model, then you really need to evaluate whether or not you wish to support those financially. Because really it's supporting your own demise, if you will, because essentially what's going to happen is those are the ones that are advocating for a limited scope type of practice. So by fueling that and funding that, you have to look at the contradiction that exists with that and make sure that you are not in contradiction with it. And so if that resonates with you, I would look at other organizations that can support that vision of looking at an inclusive neurofunctional type of chiropractic that you wish to practice in. Get involved with your regulatory boards. Make sure that you are you're commenting and supporting the self-regulation process. I think it's a fantastic thing that chiropractic is self-regulated. I think that our ability to maintain that self-regulation process is a fantastic thing. We do not want to lose that. We do not want that to be taken over by the ministry in any way. So get involved with your regulatory board. If that means putting your name in the hat and running for a board seat so that you can support and represent your wishes and your visions and your the purposes of chiropractic, then do so. But also to make sure that your voice is heard. Get involved, vote, make sure that you're supporting those that maybe are throwing their hat in the ring. Just because you don't wish to take a board seat doesn't mean that you can't support and become a campaign helper and make sure that you're getting people out of their offices with their heads up so that they can vote and get involved. It's one of the things that's really challenge in chiropractic is that a lot of people have not seen any of this coming for the last 30 years and now are sitting asking themselves what happened and how did this happen, because they were just indifferent to it. They thought that it would never affect them. They thought that nothing would ever change, and here it is on the doorstep, and we need to make sure that that doesn't continue anymore. People need to get involved, they need to become aware, and they need to get involved in such a way that they don't support organizations and people and trades organizations that don't support their vision for chiropractic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's certainly a ripple effect to indifference and apathy, isn't there?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Dr. David, any other thoughts to contribute there?
Well, I think Craig really touched on it. I think that apathy is the sort of middle name of almost every chiropractor that I've met. Unfortunately, this self-regulation that we have is exactly an honor and a right that we need to uphold, and it's not a right. Pardon me. It's a granted permission, and I do want to say that this idea of quote unquote picking a fight with the regulatory boards or picking a fight with, the status quo in legislation is not our goal. Our goal is to have this voice and to honor the fact that we're not going to stand by and let what I see is a divisive nature. They would look at us in many ways, and in much of the rhetoric that is being forced out into the public these days, as this group of quote unquote chiropractors that are taking a stand against the legislative, or at least the voice that's in command right now, as being divisive. And I don't see that at all. In fact, I see the opposite. I see as them being divisive and we being inclusive. And the realities is that our inclusiveness, is about that Venn diagram saying, yeah, of course, there's always ends of everything that goes along with it. But there really is this very large middle ground. And we have a great scope. Our scope as it is legislated really stands for what we are. So I just like to reinforce that. I think that, like anything else, if you can't, and I mean this seriously, chiropractors are not well organized for what we do with with our monies. We donate poorly. I think you need to support organizations with, if you can't sit there, donate some money to the research foundations that are looking at the impact of adjustments and the power of the subluxation. So something like the ASRF is really, the Australian Spinal Research Foundation has really been dedicated to managing that. I unfortunately don't support my alma mater anymore, but I'm a regent at many of the colleges that extend the subluxation-based message that goes out there. And so I really believe in having an academic powerhouse behind whatever side of the profession you are. So, take your monies that you would have sent to perhaps your, confused alma mater and put them into other organizations. Look, we need to be healthy. We need to be heads up. We need to be proud of what we stand for. And yeah, you know what? I'm exceedingly proud to call myself a chiropractor because of the efforts that, my forebears and my forefathers put into this chiropractic message build. And I think that, and I'm certainly a long way from being a graybeard in this whole thing, but I have been around once or twice and I have traveled the world through the chiropractic, venues. And I can tell you that it is a very, very, very important aspect of your life to not sit idly by and watch your scope and opportunity to even talk to the chiropractic that invited you into it go away. So please, don't be passive. Take the middle name apathy and turn it into active. And while you're at it, adjust a few people. It's kind of important.
Isn't that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything?
Yeah.
Isn't that the line? Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you for your time today. I know it's a busy time of year. We're recording this right now, folks, the week before Christmas. So I really appreciate your time and I appreciate what you're doing. And listeners, be sure to check out some of the initiatives that both Dr. David Fletcher and Dr. Craig Hazel are involved in. And like they've said, get involved locally, internationally, do your part to stand up for what you believe in. Thanks again for your time, guys.
Thanks, Melissa, for always being a harbinger of a great voice here. We appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thank you both for this. This has been fantastic, and let's continue on.
Thanks for being here today. If you like this show, please share it with another chiropractor and connect them with this message. We are always better off together than we are alone. If you haven't yet subscribed, head on over to Apple Podcasts or iTunes, and don't forget to rate and review the show while you're there. Be sure to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook and find out more about today's guests and all things Rockstar Doctor Life by clicking in those show notes. See you next time.